Welcome to Eye for Iran. When people talk about modern Iran, the story usually starts in 1979. But the roots of today's mistrust, divides, and even passions go back further to August 19, 1953. This week, it's been 72 years since Mossadegh was toppled in a coup backed by the CIA and MI6. The Shah returned to power, and Iran's democratic experiment came to an abrupt end. 72 years later, that event isn't just history. It still defines Iran's politics today. The regime points to it as proof of Western betrayal. Monarchists and Republicans still fight over Mossadegh's legacy, and for many Iranians, it remains the stolen moment when democracy might have taken root. So the question isn't simply what happened back then, it's why. And to help us explore that, I'm joined by one of the leading voices on Iran's modern history, Dr. Abbas Milani.
The Iranian woman who decides to walk in the streets of Tehran, Shiraz, Bandar Abbas, without a veil. The Iranian woman who says, hell with what you think. I'm not going to I'm not going to live the way you want. I'm not going to live the way you think Quran tells me. I'm going to live the way I want. That's the most potent opposition to this regime. That opposition isn't caught in the polarities that the opposition outside is.
Professor Milani is not only a scholar, but someone who has lived through the consequences of Iran's political upheavals, once imprisoned under the Shah, later censored by the Islamic Republic. His personal journey gives him a rare vantage point on why 1953 may or may not still matter today. I'm Negar Mossadegh, and this is Eye for Iran. Professor Abbas Milani, it's a pleasure to have you here on Eye for Iran.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
You are truly a legend, as you know, you are the scholar when it comes to Iran. And I know I told you privately that when I was at university studying poli-sci and international relations, I literally read all your books, and I've cited you pretty much in all my research papers. So
I'm honored and humbled.
Oh. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's a pleasure talking with you.
Fantastic. Professor Milani, I just wanted to start off with a personal lens. So before we get into the politics of 1953, I wanted to start with you, if you're comfortable with that, no pressure. You were imprisoned under the time of the Shah. You were also censored under the Islamic Republic of Iran. How has living under both systems shaped your view on how you see modern Iran?
Well, I think the most important experience for me, the most learning experience, was how different these two regimes are. And I think there's a profound information or misinformation about the difference. The Shah was, at worst, an authoritarian leader. At best, he was a modernizer. This regime, at best, is a pseudo-totalitarian regime. And at worst, a totalitarian regime. It tries to change human nature. It tries to create a new woman and men. In their mind, of course, always men, because they don't care about women. Woman is a second-class citizen to them. So the Shah never tried to change your view of the world, your essence. The Shah wasn't out to create a Pahlavi man and woman. This regime is. Khomeini are repeatedly on record saying that that's their goal. So that's the making of a totalitarian society, a totalitarian ideology. The Shah never had a totalitarian ideology. The Shah was, as I said, at worst, authoritarian, who left people alone in their private lives if they didn't meddle in direct confrontational politics. To me, one of the most important learning experiences was that when you look back at the Pahlavi era, I'm now working on a book on Reza Shah. This is equally true, even more true of his period. Because of the dominance of the rhetoric of the opposition, particularly the left and the clergy, we overlook all the democratic aspects of their daily life that existed. Why isn't it democratic that the woman of Iran, under the Shah, had the right to decide what to wear? Why isn't it democratic that the Baha'is of Iran, more or less, lived a comfortable life free from the assaults of the clergy? Why isn't it a democratic right that uh, people of any uh, social class could go to the university for free. So while both regimes have placed limits, uh, I think it's incomparable. And uh, to end one long answer by a very, I think, important point, uh, we have heard much about Savak. Savak did torture people. I know the royalists don't like to hear that, but they can be
No,
uncomfortable with the truth.
it's factual.
It's factual. I have witnessed it. I've written about it. And I've experienced it. I was in solitary confinement. That's a form of torture. I was myself beaten a couple of times. But torture in much grander scale existed. But it only existed for people who were opposed to the regime and were opposing for example, the interrogator while incarcerated. And the entire number of people executed under the Shah, the entire number, has never been accounted to be more than 1,500. This regime has killed thousands. Even in the last 6 months, I think it has probably right now is close to 1,000
That's
executions.
correct.
So
Yeah, according to Iran Human Rights.
yeah, it's comparing apples to not cherries, because these guys are not cherries. It's like comparing apples to poisoned tomato.
But of course, at the time, when you were seeking and wanting change, you didn't know that the change that would come would be as such, right? So
I think we didn't. And again, I have written many times, I'm sure you have read it because you kindly said you have, that, you know, and I can only speak for myself. I can't, I don't speak for anybody else. I think uh, in opposing the Shah, while we had some right instincts, we were for justice, we were for democracy, we were for independence. We didn't understand Iran well. We didn't understand these other aspects of reality in Iran. And I certainly didn't understand how actually independent the Shah was over the last 20 years of his rule. I
what do
think
you
the
mean by
Shah,
independent?
the rhetoric of the left and the rhetoric of the clergy today, both, is that the Shah was, quote unquote, a lackey of US imperialism or Britain. That the Shah did what the master told them to do in foreign policy and in domestic policy. Khomeini, the leftist, particularly the organized left, particularly the orthodox left, particularly not all the left, the independent leftists understood this. Khalil Maliki was an independent leftist. He understood that the Shah was different than Khomeini and better than Khomeini, and that he had some independence. But the Shah, in foreign policy, from around 64-5, was acting, in my uh, reading, based on archive, completely independent of US and England, oftentimes in opposition to them. He would follow policies that they clearly did not want. The Shah clearly fought the Americans and the British and the French on the oil issue. The Shah clearly fought the Americans on Iran's nuclear program. The Shah insisted, in my view, wrongly. I've written about this in an article with a colleague, that is a hacker, that Iran shouldn't have gone for enrichment unless Iran wanted the bomb. But the Shah went and said, under NPT, I have the right, all the documents are not declassified. He says, I have the right, you have no business telling me what to do. All of these was lost to us. And we thought, as Khomeini famously said, this nuclear program is junk. He said this in 1978. And the boss, the Americans, ordered the Shah to buy it. And now I am stopping it. All of that, in my view, was wrong. He was acting independently on oil, on nuclear, on the region. Uh, and so almost um, everything we said, I said, again, almost everything the opposition said about Iran was based on a both misreading of this situation, and a complete ignorance, if not misreading, of Khomeini. The opposition praised Khomeini in the 20 years before as some kind of a liberator. Khomeini was not a liberator. Khomeini was very clear, was a profoundly reactionary leader, both within Islam and within Iranian society. Khomeini is the leader of the counter-reformation in modern Shiism in Iran. He will go down, in my view, in history as a character like Savonarola, people who were against Renaissance. He will go down in history as someone like Hamann in Germany, about which Isaiah Berlin has written a brilliant book. They were Shiite reformation in Iran in late 19th century, early 20th century, and Khomeini was the most powerful enemy of this reformation, religious reformation. He was also the most powerful, albeit rather ignorant, enemy of modernity. Everything the Shah wanted to do was trying to move, except in the realm of politics, was to move Iran towards becoming a modern society, from equality to women to equality in religious matters to free education, all of these things. Khomeini was opposed to all of these things. And the opposition decided, I'm going to pick him over the Shah, with whom we had some clear differences. But I would think today that a more wiser opposition would have looked at the situation and said, well, there are issues that are wrong with the Shah, but he's certainly better than what's waiting in the wing. If the wing is Khomeini, that's reaction coming.
And would the Shah have listened, do you think, if the
No,
opposition had?
no, that's part of the problem.
Yeah. And his
That's
own
the part
role
of,
too, right?
oh,
As well.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, uh, again, that's why I think part of the narrative of some of the defenders of the Pahlavi era is misguided. Unless you accept where the regime went wrong, you're not going to be able to fix it. To say, as for example, the title of a book that the royalists like to say is the gospel, the fall of heaven. If it wasn't if it was heaven, it wouldn't have fallen.
No, and
Uh,
someone like you wouldn't be imprisoned and tortured in jail.
I would, and and there were others. It's not. I mean,
Of course.
many people uh, told the Shah throughout his 37 years that you got to go down, slow down on some of these things. In 19, you know, 62, the Americans told the Shah. Some of his advisors said, "Go a little easy." In 1971 to 72, when he tried to establish eventually the one-party system, as he began to concentrate his power, people told him in private, the one-party system is wrong. It's against the Constitution. Uh, it is not the opposition, that's the so-called Panjah Haftihad that the royalists like to blame all the time. It wasn't the opposition that empowered Khomeini. It was the Shah's regime. It was Savak that allowed this enormous network that Khomeini created, from terrorist groups like Fadayan Islam to Madrasa Alavi, where they trained in the ideology of the Islamic Republic. No other opposition group was allowed such freedom. They could collect money. They collected millions, for in the name of Khomeini as he was in exile. And Savak looked the other way because they thought, and they weren't alone, the entire Western world thought the same, that the Islamists are an ally in the big fight against communism. Well,
Wow.
it turns out the Islamists were as much a threat to democracy and reason and modernity as the leftists were, far, in some places far worse.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And at that period of time, obviously, the Carter administration, all of them were dealing with the threat of the Cold War.
It isn't just the Carter administration. The Carter administration has a lot to answer for, absolutely. But the Nixon administration, the Johnson administration, the Kennedy administration, the Eisenhower administration begin from the beginning of the Cold War. And it's not just Iran. The entire Western world decided to go easy on these Islamists in order for them to fight communism.
They just saw the immediate threat, right? And
They
didn't
saw
look
the
to the
immediate
future at all.
they saw the immediate threat. The famous case of the Mufti of Jerusalem, uh, who absolutely cooperated with Nazis, who absolutely organized a group to fight in the favor of the Nazis. He was allowed to go free because Islamists throughout Egypt, Lebanon, Iran told the Americans, told the Europeans, told the French, don't put him on trial. He's one of us. Well, he was one of them in fighting communism, but he was also, like Khomeini, creating an incredible network for seizing power. And that network is what the Americans saw in 78 and the British. And when they thought the Shah can't go on, they said, well, the only force that is organized, that is national, that is counter communist, that can hold the country together are the religious. Khomeini literally, what I just told you, is almost verbatim in a letter that Khomeini wrote to Carter, saying, back us up and you get what you want.
Wow.
Who created that network? The opposition didn't. The Shah's regime did.
So there's obviously a lot of factors, and let's also get into 1953 because that's potentially a factor as well. For those of us in our audience who don't know, give us a brief interview of the 1953 coup, and also wanted to know if you see your story as part of maybe a long shadow of 1953.
Well, 53, I think, needs to be understood more historically and less emotionally. I think the Iranian society and much of the progressive forces around the world, leftists around the world, look at 53 essentially from an emotional point of view, which is perfectly fine. But at some point, we need to look at the history. Who was the most important force in overthrowing Mossadegh? I think the evidence, archival evidence, is clear, categorical. It was the clergy. It was the clergy who could bring out the largest number of people. Next to it was the Tudeh party. American archival evidence indicates that. When Kashani turned against Mossadegh, again, you could clearly see in the documents. When Kashani turned against Mossadegh, the Americans and the British said, now we can defeat Mossadegh. So that religious force is one of the most, I think, understudied and underappreciated pivotal actor in the overthrow of Mossadegh. So Mossadegh was democratically elected. For those of you those of your readers who might not know, who was a democratically elected prime minister. His supporters like to claim that he was the only democratically elected prime minister. That's utter nonsense, I think. He was probably the most popular, for sure, but he was elected the same way, absolutely the same way, that every other prime minister before him was selected. Parliament gave a person a vote of confidence, a vote of preference. The Shah, by constitution, was forced to appoint him the prime minister. That's how Razmara, the person that was assassinated as a prime minister, and his assassination paved the way for Khomeini, for Mossadegh to come to prime ministership. He was elected the same way. So he was elected on essentially two platforms. First, nationalize the oil, and two, free and fair democratic elections. And he was very charismatic. He was a very clever politician. He was one of the most honest politicians in 20th century Iran, in the sense that no one, even his worst enemies, have accused him of financial corruption. As, for example, Razmarov was known to be, as Qavam al-Sultaneh was notorious for being corrupt financially. Nobody has blamed Mossadegh. Uh, but he was also very charismatic. And as soon as he comes to power, the British, who were unhappy with the nationalization of the oil, decide to try to overthrow him. Again, the evidence is very clear, archival evidence. Uh, and they go to the Shah and they say, we want you to dismiss him. And the Shah says, I won't do it. I need to have a legal base to overthrow him. I won't do something that is illegal. The British then threatened to attack Iran. The Truman administration stops them. I mean, it's clear. If there was no Truman administration, if there was no preponderance of American power, the British would have arrogantly thought they could take over Abadan, overthrow Mossadegh, and install somebody they like. But the Truman administration said, absolutely not. We have to find a diplomatic solution. Every effort to convince the Shah to overthrow Mossadegh, the Shah refused. He said, we need to do it legally. And in this process, Mossadegh kept becoming more and more convinced that there's an effort to overthrow him, and he became more and more autocratic in the way he ruled. He was democratically elected like people before him, but he amassed in his own hand more power than probably any prime minister in modern history of Iran. He essentially took the power to develop legislation in his own hand, something he had specifically opposed when he was a member of the parliament. He decided that because there's too many opponents and we need to make radical decisions, give me and my cabinet the right to pass legislation. And there's good legal argument that that was not a legal right to have. But he was very popular. He was very patriotic. But he was picking a fight that apparently he did not fully understand. He was picking a fight with the Seven Sisters, all of the oil companies. He was picking a fight where, for example, China, Russia, Soviet Union at the time, Czechoslovakia, who he wanted to sell oil to, refused not to buy it, but they said, we just can't carry it. 90% of transport of oil at the time was in the control of the Seven Sisters. Mossadegh offered to sell China. I found this in the Chinese archive. Iranian oil at 50% discount.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, the Chinese said, well, first of all, we'll buy it a little more. This is too much discount. But second of all, we'll be glad to buy it, but we can't carry it. So, and they pressured and they pressured. And the Americans, again, all of this is now available in documents, thousands of pages of documents that have been declassified. The Americans still hope that there would be a diplomatic solution, that they could convince Mossadegh to make some compromises with the British and arrive at a new agreement. Mossadegh was basically adamant that he wasn't going to compromise. And by late 1952, it's when Mossadegh is seen by the Americans, finally, that he's not going to compromise. They decide that maybe they should go work with the British. And the British, in the meantime, again, all of this is so very clearly documented. They made this document about 53, 2 years ago, that made a lot of noise. And they thought that this was a new discovery. But it was in Woodhouse's memoirs published 25 years ago. Woodhouse is the British master organizer of all of this. And he says, on the way to Washington, suddenly I realized the Americans don't buy our story about oil. But they will buy our story if we say Mossadegh will fall to the communists. So when he comes, this time he says, we got to get rid of Mossadegh because he's not going to be able to stay in power. The communists are taking over. And about the same time, again, all of this is available if anybody bothered to look. About the same time, there is a day of demonstration against uh, uh, Truman's uh, representative, Iran's representative to Mossadegh, Harriman, Abril Harriman is sent. And, and on a couple of demonstrations, one against Harriman and the other one on the day the Mossadegh returned to power, the embassy reports that Mossadegh had a few thousand people in the morning. The communists had several tens of thousands in the afternoon. So he's not going to be able to withstand. So the narrative changes. You can clearly see at around the end of October, the narrative from the CIA and the State Department changes. I still don't know whether here intelligence was fitting policy or policy was following intelligence. But now they decided Mossadegh, first the Truman administration, and then definitely the Eisenhower administration. They decided Mossadegh is not going to withstand the to the party. Again, remember, this is 53. From 46 to 52, the number of East European countries where the communists had overthrown a democratic regime and declared the People's Republic was remarkable. The Korean War was going on. So the West felt that there is an onslaught of communism. China had emerged. The Soviet Union and China were now part of the Soviet. All of these convinced the administration, Truman and then Eisenhower administration, that Mossadegh has to be gotten rid of. But there were also at this time people inside Iran, Mossadegh's one-time allies, who decided the same thing. People like Baha'i, people like General Zahedi, people like some of Mossadegh's closest allies who began agitating against him in the parliament. All the narrative about the coup from the progressives is based on what the CIA was trying to do. But there's another side to the story, what these people were doing. Some of them were in contact with the American embassy for sure, but they weren't agents of the CIA or the British. Some of them were. The Rashidian brothers clearly worked with the British, and they were involved in all of this. But there were also other people, Mossadegh's erstwhile strongest supporters, who said, we can't win this war. We got to make a concession. There's an embargo.
So they flipped out of convenience, essentially?
No, some of them, I think, flipped out of conviction that Mossadegh is leading a war that Iran cannot win. If you're a patriot at that time, you have a choice. You see, Mossadegh is heading straight for a confrontation. The West has aligned all of its forces. Iran has some popular support in Egypt and other places, but the economy is on the verge of collapse. The government can't make payroll. It needs to issue print money. And when a group that controls the printing of the money in the parliament said to Mossadegh, you got to stop this. This is not going to work. You can't just print money. We got to fix the economy. So those people, I think, out of what they thought was a patriotic recognition, that this isn't going to work.
Sinking ship.
The sinking ship. Sinking ship. So Mossadegh now has a parliament that is becoming increasingly agitated against them. A parliament that he himself, his government, had overseen the election for.
So could he not see that? Would that not be obvious to something like a man like him, or is he incredibly stubborn? How do you not see that?
I think that's a brilliant question. I really don't know. I really don't know. Because we know some of his most trusted advisors told him, he decides at this moment, he decides to have a referendum. He says, I want to dissolve the parliament. The parliament he had himself elected, based on the notion that the Americans and the British were spending money to help support their candidates. He was right. The evidence indicates that they were, but so were the Soviets. The Soviets were almost equally active in all of this. But Mossadegh had come to power in a parliament that was similarly elected. So he goes to the Shah and says, dissolve the parliament. The Shah says, no, I don't. I won't dissolve the parliament. So Mossadegh says, I'll dissolve it. He doesn't have the constitutional right to do that. He says, I'll have a referendum.
And also, that sounds very undemocratic of a democratically elected leader, what you're pointing
Precisely.
out. Yeah.
Precisely. Two of his most stalwart allies, ministers in his cabinet, one of them, Dr. Sadeghi, to me, one of the most respectable public intellectuals of 20th century Iran, one of the most decent, and a stalwart supporter of Mossadegh to the last day of his life. He was a minister of interior. The other one, Dr. Shah, closest advisor to Mossadegh, professor of constitutional law at Tehran University, where I later taught. They both go to Mossadegh and say, you can't do this. There is no provision in the Constitution for a referendum. And furthermore, they say to him, both of them, they say to him, if you dissolve the Constitution, the Parliament, then in that interim period, the Shah has the right to fire you. He'll fire you. Don't do it. He says he won't dare. According to one account, he said the boy won't dare. The Shah won't dare. I have a letter I found in Shaigan's memoirs that I published in the book on the Shah, where Mossadegh writes to the Shah that when there is no parliament in session, you have the constitutional right to dismiss the prime minister.
Wow.
So, absolutely. Sadeghi tells him that there has been I don't remember the number of days. He said there have been 2,000 days since 1907 where there was no parliament in session, and at least 19 different prime ministers were appointed by the king at the time. You have served in some of these cabinets. You can't now assume that he's not going to fire you and appoint somebody else. And you yourself has written to him. When he dissolved the parliament, then the Shah decided to issue that order to dismiss him on August 15th. When he receives the notice, he signs it, and then he says, I no longer have the belief that the Shah has the power to dismiss me. That's not the way the Constitution works. You can't interpret the Constitution based, even someone as esteemed as Mossadegh. And he decides not to accept what many people think is a constitutionally valid order. Mossadegh supporters still say that it wasn't. Mossadegh himself in the court says, it doesn't say I didn't accept that legally. Mossadegh says, I thought this was fabricated because the Shah's signature wasn't very correct. It seemed to have been added. In other words, he accepts the legality. And as soon as he arrests the person who delivers the order, a colonel by the name of Nasiri, who then becomes the head of Savak later on, Mossadegh arrests him and goes on the radio the next day and says there was a coup attempt against me and it was defeated. Again, for anyone who's interested, I think one of the most important documents is the conversation between Mossadegh and the American ambassador. who immediately goes back to Iran the day Mossadegh decides not to accept the letter of dismissal. They had left Iran, the ambassador had left Iran to stay clear of the allegations that they had a role in all of this. And goes and talks to Mossadegh. And Mossadegh says, yeah, there was a coup against us and we defeated it. And he says, but I thought there was an order dismissing you. What about that? Mossadegh said, yes, there was, but I have decided that the Shah no longer has the power to dismiss me. And the ambassador says, could you repeat that part again? I almost verbatim quoting. Could you repeat that part again? I want to make sure I got this right. And then he writes in his report to the president that Mossadegh is the one who's doing the coup, because constitutionally, as far as we understand, if there is no parliament, who has the power to dismiss the prime minister? If the Shah doesn't, we had to rely on the goodwill of Mossadegh to continue the democratic process. But that's not the way constitutions work. Constitutions don't work based on relying on the goodwill. What if Mossadegh had tomorrow decided, I'm not going to have another election? So there is overwhelming, this is the last point that I think we have to remember. There is overwhelming evidence from the American archive and the British archive that by August 17, they both had decided that the coup attempt that they both had tried to help organize, and to me, as an Iranian, they shouldn't have done this. That's an illegal interference in Iranian politics. But as someone who's interested in history rather than emotions, that's not what seems to have overthrown Mossadegh. They certainly, the British and the Americans, spent millions publishing articles against Mossadegh in Iranian journals. We know that. But what overthrew Mossadegh on the 18th and the 19th is the coming together of an increasing number of people in the streets. I think most importantly, and the evidence, archival evidence seems to indicate that, most importantly, because Kashani changed sides. Kashani is the guy who had, again, from a year ago, you could see the American archives and the British archives say Kashani and the Tudeh party are the two forces that have the greatest mobilizing power. Kashani could close the bazaars in favor of the Shah. Kashani, it is Kashani who had the closest ties to these tough guys that the Mossadegh supporters believe were hired by the CIA to overthrow Mossadegh. Sha'ban Ja'fari, the Alvat, Fahishaha, the pimps and the prostitutes. Well, first of all, the organizer of the coup, Mr. Kim Roosevelt, who went to Iran, didn't speak Farsi, hadn't served in Iran, didn't know much about the Iranian. The British knew, but the British couldn't mobilize thousands of people on the morning of August 19th or in the afternoon of August 18th. So it's a complicated story. Emotionally, people are rightly angered. Why should the US interfere in Iranian affairs? Why should the British? The British had been pillaging Iranian oil. Mossadegh was absolutely right, I think, in criticizing the behavior of the British. But at the end of the day, to go back to what you said, I think he was much more interested in preserving his own reputation as an anti-colonialist hero than making a compromise that would have maybe tarnished his reputation, but saved Iran from August 23, August 53.
And
In
what
other words,
Why do you
Yeah.
suppose it's still such an open wound then, and not just some sort of historical debate, but politically in 2025? Does it go back to people not truly understanding what happened or the intentions behind it?
Well, uh, I would like to ask you a question. How do you know this is still as much of a wound as it was before? I don't believe that.
You don't think so? Just in terms of
No.
the political conversations, or when people start talking about what were the revolution and what the state of Iran is today, a lot of people, a lot of supporters of Mossadegh, for example, say, well, if
Yeah.
that coup would have never happened, we wouldn't be in the place that we are today, and it really affects Iran
Yeah.
in the here and now.
No, no, I absolutely. I read the same much. Some of the stuff that you read, I probably as well read. I hear that uh, uh, uproar, and I trust their intention. But uh, the question wasn't whether Mossadegh supporters still are entangled in that debate as much as before. They are. They're not giving up. They don't change their narrative much. Uh, but the question is the Iranian public that way? I don't think so. I think clearly the Iranian public has shifted over the last 20, 30 years. Your generation of Iranians have emerged who say, I don't believe in demons and divines. I don't believe in black and white in history. And I don't need you, whether the you is the Tudor party or a royalist pundit or a leftist pundit. I don't need you guys to tell me, and they're almost always guys. Uh, uh, I don't need you scholars, pundits to tell me. I want to read myself and figure this out. And look at the books that they have read most religiously, quote unquote. When Hamas Ashar published the memoirs, an interview, not an interview, with Sha'ban Jafari, reviled by all of these Mossadegh supporters as a lout, as a lumpen proletariat who, with the help of a few prostitutes, overthrew the democratic government of Mossadegh. The book had tens of thousands of readers. My book on the Shah in Iran, I put it on the internet because the regime banned it. It has had literally hundreds of thousands of readers, downloads. I don't know how many read it, but I know how many downloaded it. Any book that tells people of Iran right now, inside Iran, and even outside Iran, what the evidence indicates rather than what the mythology dictates, has much, much more readers. Read how many readers some of the, for example, proclamations of supporters of Mossadegh have. They have a few hundred. They have every right to complain. I don't begrudge them, but I don't think they any longer refer to what is a mass movement. I was in Iran in 1979, after the revolution. The first birth, essentially, day, the first opportunity to celebrate Mossadegh. And I was part of the population. Almost 1 million people went to Ahmedabad, his estate outside Tehran. It was like a pilgrimage. Literally, the road shut down. There were so many cars. People began to walk. If there's a similar event today, I don't think as many people, will go. And if there's an event today about August 53, the pathos of Mossadegh supporters is not, to me, based on anecdotal evidence, what represents Iranian society. The Iranian regime has been proselytizing the coup as the legitimization of, for example, the hostage crisis. There are people in the West, journalists like you, prominent journalists, who have written that hostage taking is a legitimate understanding to what the U.S. did in 1953. First of all, The people who took the hostages are the people who overthrew Mossadegh. The clergy, Khomeini, Khomeini, Khomeini was a mentee of Kashani. Khomeini was and remained an enemy of Mossadegh. He thought of Mossadegh as an enemy of Iran. So how can you say that a bunch of radical students, manipulated or ignorant enough to think that they can take American diplomats and hold them 444 days, is something just? And then you try, as a journalist, to find a justification for this? What could justify this? Every country has legitimate gripes against other countries. Mexico has legitimate gripes against the US. They took part of the territory, Texas, New Mexico. If tomorrow a group of radicals in Mexico take Americans hostage, who's going to dare say this is a legitimate response? But they say this about Iran and get away with it. And they say this about Iran without having even the knowledge to read one word of Farsi to figure out what happened at that time. What was Kashani doing? What was Nawab Safavi? What were the terrorists of Fadayan Islam doing? Why was Mossadegh's supporters aligning with one of the most notorious Islamist terrorists in 1951 to kill Razumara? All of this complexity is reduced to the legitimate complaint that the US should not, and the British should not, have interfered in Iranian politics. They shouldn't have overthrown Mossadegh. Obviously, I don't believe they should have the right. They had the right. I don't think they had the right. I think we have the right to criticize them. But even as Iranians, our first responsibility is to understand why Mossadegh fell. Mossadegh fell at least as much because of his own mistakes. Because, in my view, of his own intransigence.
And so looking this week, this week is the 72th anniversary of the 1953 coup. So you don't see it then as being part of any identity politics. You mentioned people of my generation not considering it or thinking about it when it comes to the politics of today. But what about like the dichotomy of monarchists that see him potentially, some of them see Mossadegh as someone as reckless, someone who may have even led to the 1979 revolution. And then, of course, you have his supporters and some more left-wing people who see him as this democratic hero. How do you account for that?
Well, I account for that. I account for it. I can't explain it. I account for it in the sense that politics is, particularly populist politics, is not the realm of rationality. It's the realm of emotion. It's the realm of a slogan rather than facts. They're not interested in the details of the facts. I think royalists like to blame Mossadegh for almost everything, but I think Mossadegh was a patriot. I think Mossadegh meant well, but I think Mossadegh, in meaning well, did some damage to Iran. I think the Shah meant well. The Shah, absolutely, contrary to everything that his enemies say, to the last moment stood up to the pressure by the Americans and the British to organize a coup against Mossadegh. He did it only when he thought, and I think, in my view, rightly thought, that if there is no parliament, he has the right to dismiss the prime minister. And Mossadegh went out of his way to make the Shah make that choice. Mossadegh did not really want to make peace with the Shah, although he said he wanted. But he kept increasing pressures on him. Remember, Mossadegh was not in favor of the change of dynasty to the Pahlavi dynasty. Mossadegh was one of the few opponents of Reza Shah's ascent to the throne. And so Mossadegh's foreign minister at that time, before the coup, the weeks and months before the coup, wrote some of the most virulent anti-Shah op-ed pieces in the magazine for which he was the editor-in-chief Fatimi. I have quoted some of Fatimi's editorials in the days before. You cannot be the foreign minister of a government whose head is the Shah and call the Shah the most radically, the vilest things you could say about anyone. Fatimi said about the Shah. Those things, I think, help people like Kashani. And Kashani, why did Kashani change side? We have to ask that question. Partly because Mossadegh stood up to him. Kashani wanted a woman to be veiled. Mossadegh said no. Kashani wanted all the Baha'is thrown out of government. Mossadegh said no. Kashani wanted his son elected uh, as a member of a parliament. Mossadegh said no. But Kashani also was an anti-communist. Kashani literally, I'm verbatim quoting, read the documents, meets with the American ambassador secretly, invites the American ambassador to Iran secretly to a meeting place. He says, don't bring anybody. My son will translate. He will be the only person. And he tells the American ambassador, we both want the same thing. We don't want communists and we don't want Mossadegh. Let's cooperate. The minutes of that meeting are there. And then a couple of days later, somebody from Khashoggi's office goes to the embassy and says, we need some money to organize all of this. So for political purposes, both, the narrative the royalists have is that this was a day of national uprising. The narrative that Mossadegh have is that this was a day of infamy, a bunch of pimps and prostitutes rented by the CIA. This is the term, the crowd rented by the CIA overthrew Mossadegh. Both of these, I think, don't stand up if you are interested in facts rather than fictions, political fiction.
So what lessons can we draw today from all of that, especially when it comes to, I'm starting to see a theme here when it comes to Iranian politics. So much emotion, a lot of conspiracy, not a lot of facts. And we see that today in the identity politics of Iran and in the opposition as well outside of Iran. So what lessons can be drawn from here so that people are able to look forward? Because essentially when you're filled with, I'm starting to see that based on what you're saying, that like every vision of Iran's future seems to be tied up with unresolved issues of the past, right? Like this nostalgic feeling. And if you keep holding on to this nostalgic feeling, whether it's based in, it seems like in a lot of cases, not in facts, like you said, how can you truly lay the groundwork or build a democratic society that's built on principles of universal law and rule of law and human rights?
Again, I think I have to sort of disagree with your definition of what the opposition is. Your definition of the opposition are the organized opposition outside who have access to the internet, who have cadres, whether they hire them financially or whether they work for ideological purposes. It doesn't matter. They're revolutionary cadres. They're cadres. They fill the social media with a lot of talk. But the Iranian woman who decides to walk in the streets of Tehran, Shiraz, Bandar Abbas without a veil, the Iranian woman who says, hell with what you think. I'm not going to I'm not going to live the way you want. I'm not going to live the way you think Quran tells me. I'm going to live the way I want. That's the most potent opposition to this regime. That opposition isn't caught in the polarities that the opposition outside is. I have never seen a demonstration, mass demonstration in Iran have slogans that are divisive. They have slogans that are unitary. I don't see too many of them say "Long live Mossadegh," long live. With the only exception is Reza Shah. There's a lot of Reza Shah, Ruhat Shah. We have to think about that. What was about Reza Shah? Reza Shah was a pragmatist. Reza Shah said the clergy cannot have a veto power in politics. The clergy have taught for 44 years against Reza Shah more than almost anybody else. To Iranian society today, I think if you take a poll, who was the most beloved leader, I think Reza Shah would come first. And to me, rightly so, because he's unique. His model was a model of changing society based on what society needs, a modernity that is Iranian and global. Reza Shah didn't emulate the West, contrary to what everything the mullahs say. He said, we need to understand Iran first, and then we need to learn from the West, get their technology, don't give up our language, don't give up our architecture, build a new modernity. That's what the people in Iran, the most important opposition in Iran wants. So the organized opposition outside makes claims about what the Iranian people want.
I was going to ask you, how do you as a scholar cut through all that speculation and divisiveness, etc., and know, without being in Iran, of course, we're not in Iran, we don't have reliable polling, etc. How do we know what the people of Iran want? How do you cut through all of that?
But the way I cut through it is that I do what any scholar should do: begin with no presumptions, and allow the facts to speak for themselves. I have seen no fact that says, for example, that the people of Iran hate Mossadegh. I've also seen no fact that says they think Mossadegh is a model to follow. Absolutely not. I look at the, 7, 8 years ago, I might be wrong in the date, but you can check it. I wrote an article in The Atlantic called Iran's Incremental Revolution. I said, women in Iran are making a revolution in Iran. This is 6 years before life.
Women, life, freedom movement.
Not because I was particularly brilliant. I was at all brilliant. Absolutely not. But
No,
you
you
could
are.
see. No. I really mean that. If you look at what the women were doing, you look at the data. You looked at the data that there was. When I wrote that, there were more published writers in that year in Iran than there were men. When I was a young boy, there were 3 published women novelists in Iran. Now, for the last 10 years, 15 years, so I think a disproportionate number of best-selling authors, filmmakers, uh, almost every domain are Iranian women. You look at the way they were appearing in the street. You look at the way they were writing. You looked at the number of journals they were publishing, and you knew this ain't. This is not a society that is going to accept Jannati and Khamenei and Allam al-Huda. These are parasites. This is a nightmare for Iran. But Iran has woken up from a nightmare. But as anybody who's ever had a nightmare knows, to get rid of the source of nightmare is more difficult than just getting up from it. Iranians have woken up from this nightmare, but now they need to get rid of the source of this nightmare, which is dogmatism, which is religious domination, which is vilayat faqih. How can you rule a country where 60% of the most educated are women, and you in your ideology say, I, that man, a 90-year-old man, have the right to decide what this woman should wear, what she should study? Who the hell are you? Jannati couldn't walk his way out of a bag. Khamenei is absolutely a deluded man in the fog of his ideology. He is one of the most uncertain dogmatist I've ever seen in modern politics. Someone with as much personal insecurity and ideological conviction that he speaks for God. How come your God hasn't spoken to anybody else this way? In 21st century, this man in 21st century says, if you are touched by a Baha'i, your hand is dirty. You should wash yourself. Shame on you.
Terrible. Terrible.
But Iranian society no longer accepts this nonsense. Iranian society is more represented by intellectuals who used to be religious and now go and kiss the feet of a Baha'i and say, I'm sorry for everything we have done to you. That's the future of Iran. Those women are the future of Iran. They are the opposition to this regime. Not just anybody who speaks loudest. Clearly, uh, 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 Prince Reza Pahlavi is more popular. There is just a recent poll that has come out, Gaman, which is to me the most reliable poll we have.
On Iran, yes, definitely.
On Iran. And it says, 33% think of him as a worthy leader. 33%. The next one is Khamenei. The next one is another Ahmadinejad. That's important. 25% are in this camp almost. 30% is very important. It's the most important character. It's the most important force right now. Personality. You can't get rid of this regime unless you get that other 70%, or at least other 60% behind you. Reza Shah did exactly that. He brought everybody together, including Mossadegh for a while, which he knew was his enemy, to pave the way to get rid of the Qajars that he thought, I think rightly, was a cancer in Iranian society. This regime is a cancer. You can't get rid of it by medication, and you can't get rid of it by ignoring the fact that you have to mobilize the whole body to fight this disease. Then cancer will die.
And based on those,
Most cancers.
yeah, most cancers at least, and based on those stats, then how would you yourself define the opposition inside Iran, like you said, not outside, but inside of Iran?
Inside Iran, the opposition is anyone, in my view, anyone who in any way uh, works towards a democratic, egalitarian, rational, secular society. A woman who comes into the streets without her veil is, to me, one of the vanguards of this opposition. A teacher who refuses to teach the nonsense that these people want to teach and teaches rationality. The Instagram person who reads, I read some of the stuff that people write and their messages, interpretations of plays, of poetry. They are the opposition. Let me give you an example. We just put on a play at Stanford by the most prominent playwright Iran has ever produced, Bahram Beyzai. I think there is a consensus on this. On a few things in literature there is, but I think there is on this. And it's one of the most accomplished, if not the most accomplished director. Okay? We have put out a play by him, 6 performances, a cast of 40. It is a remarkable rereading of Iranian history, of the revolution of Iran, from the point of view of women. Do a search after we talk and see how many sites inside Iran have written about this place and how many sites outside Iran, including your Iran International. Dead silent. The rest, dead silent. If there was an opposition, if there was a serious, thoughtful opposition outside, this would be the play that they would say, wow. They write, I don't want to name the great media sources outside.
Of course, no worries.
But I mention only yours because I'm talking to you, so
Yeah, it's all
everybody
good.
knows. You know, Iran International covers everything. They haven't written a single line about this. Stanford University doesn't need a line from Iran International. Obviously, Bahram Beyzai doesn't need a line from Iran International for anybody else. But it tells you how far off the outside is about recognizing what is really the opposition, and where the heart of the opposition beats, where they understand, is inside Iran. I can't tell you how many letters we've had to our program saying, when is it you're going to put this online so we can see
That's
it?
amazing.
It is amazing.
So do you see, like, what would explain this? Do you see this as a disconnect between kind of our world and the world inside Iran? Like how do you explain this? Is it going again back to identity politics and focusing on all the wrong things?
I can't explain it. I mean, I really don't. I mean, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories.
Of
The
course.
easiest one to get into conspiracy theory is that, you know, such and such a program doesn't like me, it doesn't like Bezai, doesn't like Stanford. But how can you be, a, in my view, you cannot be a legitimate opposition for democracy and secularism in Iran and not recognize the singularity of this event. Probably the most important, one of the two top universities in the world, has brought a top director. 40 Iranians have worked 5 years, 6 years. 40 Iranians without financial remuneration. These are all very successful entrepreneurs, except one of them. Nobody is a professional actor. For the love of Iran, for the love of art, for the love of Persian language, you ignore this and you show, at least to me, that you don't know what Iran is, you don't know what the opposition to this regime is, and you look at the world through the jaundiced view of your ideology. If we don't toe your line, we are not the opposition. Uh, they've issued a couple of nasty uh, statements uh, against my book on the Reza Shah without the book having even come out. And they say that I am celebrating Reza Shah because I want to uh, undervalue his son and his grandson. I again, you know, somebody sent me from inside Iran 156 never seen before personal letters of the Shah to his father, Reza Shah. Okay, I wrote an article about it, published in Asu, and I said I have access to this. Do a search and see how many sites who claim to be royalists have even paid attention to the fact that I now have in my possession, I'm going to put it in the archive, everybody can access to it, 156 never seen before letters. Imagine if I had said I have 100 unpublished letters from Gugush, for example, to Behrouz Boussouri. Every media outlet would be on my door. Could you see one of them? What does it say? Does it talk about nose surgery? Zero. So that's not the real opposition. The real opposition, these are opposition, but they're not the sole opposition. The real opposition is in Iran who says, wow, a play by Bahram Ezai, a play and a rereading of Dashakor from the point of view of a woman. Every element of what should be celebrated as a glorious moment for the opposition Stanford University is not, Iranian studies is not the opposition to the Iranian regime. We are defenders of Iranian culture. But we are not afraid of the hoodlums who rule Iran. So if we want to give a prize, as we did to uh, uh, several prominent people, some of them who lived in your area, the engineer, the great, I've gotten tired of talking so long.
No.
Who are we talking about? I'm sorry.
Sehun?
Sehun. We gave a prize to Sehun. We gave a prize to Beizai, Bita Prize. And, Kayhan speaks for Khamenei, wrote a nasty letter against me and against Iranian studies, said this has become a center of Baha'i activism. Look who they invite, look who they gave a prize to. Sehun and Beizai, you can't give a... This year, we are giving the prize to another member of your city, Amanat.
Oh, Amonat, fantastic.
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
He is the most... We don't choose him because he's Baha'i, but we certainly don't exclude him because he's Baha'i.
Of course.
So at least 3 of our winners are Baha'is. There might be more, I don't know. We don't look into their idea of that religion. People in Iran know it. But here, Bahram Beizai, reading Hedayat from a point of view of a woman, you could almost say that this is the manifesto of the future Iran. Zero, zilch.
So, Professor Milani, where is this all headed then? Like the future of Iran?
Tomorrow. To a glorious tomorrow. I have no doubt in my mind. None.
Then I mean, obviously there's repression like we've never seen before to account for, but is there more to it than why people haven't been able to rise up yet?
Well, first of all, there's been repression like there's never been before. There's been more executions than there's never been before, but there's also more resistance than ever before. I see images from cities around Iran. People kindly tell me about what they see in the streets as they walk around in the streets of Tehran, the streets of Shiraz, the streets of Qom. Every time a woman walks on the streets of Iran without a veil, that's an act of resistance. We just don't see the forms of resistance. We are obviously emotionally more likely to respond to an act of oppression because it's horrendous when they take, in 21st century, they take a person and bring a crane in the middle of a city and hang someone. They just did it 2 days ago. And there's a child in the audience watching. Shame on you. Shame on your ideology that says it's okay to do something that they stopped in medieval Europe. They used to do this in medieval Europe. They used to quarter in medieval Europe. I have no illusion about what Europe did. In Shakespeare's time, they would quarter a person and hang them on the streets. But that was medieval. Now, people are worried about what a child sees. Shame on you for doing this. We see that as an act of oppression, and we are angered by it, rightly so. We should be more angered. There should be now demonstrations of hundreds of thousands, not a few hundred, hundreds of thousands against how many people this regime is killing, how many stupid mistakes Khamenei has made, put Iran on a war path that is unnecessary, unneeded. But we don't see that. We see the oppression, the acts of resistance, I think, daily by people inside Iran hearten me to believe that this regime is but a nightmare and is a corpse. But to wake from a nightmare and to get rid of a corpse, you need an effort. That effort is coming. I Iran is a remarkable country. Let me end on this because I'm losing my voice. Iran is a remarkable country. It's a remarkable culture. It has remarkable literature. It has sustained from Alexander to the Arabs to the Westerners. It has kept its identity. It's one of the most consequential civilizations in the world. If there are 5 or 6 civilizations like China, like India, like Egypt, that have contributed to the world, Iran is one of those. We as Iranians have not done a good job protecting our heritage, introducing our heritage, defending our heritage. Beizai has done. Amanat has done. Some of the most dogged defenders of Iran's cultural heritage are Baha'is. This regime hates Baha'is because it hates Iran. The future of Iran is in the hands of people like you who are looking for what the truth is rather than Rozahuni.
Thank you so much. That was a very enlightening, emotional, beautiful conversation. Truly an honor to speak with you, Professor Milani, today on Eye for Iran.
My pleasure. It was مستمع صاحب سخن را بر سر ذوق آورد, as they say.
Sign up for our weekly briefing newsletter at iranintl.com/newsletter. We deliver what you need to know with top stories, key analysis, and exclusive reports direct to your inbox. Now, if you like this episode, you can hit the like button. You can leave us a comment and let us know what you think. The Eye for Iran podcast series is brought to you by Iran International, your go-to destination for expert Iranian news in both Farsi and English. For more, you can head to our dedicated English website, iranintl.com/en.